Hey folks, Lenny Lawson here, the car guru. I am disabled to some degree right now, but I'm going to get over it. I was told recently that my new hip that I received a year ago, January the 30th, was loose. Now there's this spike that is jabbed down inside your femur that they hack off with a chainsaw. Probably not, but that's what it felt like. And so I was told that because I was having so much thigh pain that I might have a loose prosthesis or prosthetic, whatever you call it. Well, I had a CT scan. This is a geezer update, by the way, and I apologize if you're offended by the geezer term. I am in my late 60s, and that's how I view myself, but it is a term of endearment. You know, I don't lament the fact that I am this age. I just lament all the ailments that come with it. So they decided they needed to do a CT scan to see what the real story was, and then I had to wait a couple days, and then I had an appointment with the orthopedic surgeon who did my surgery to begin with. And I go into his office with my wife, and he said, would you walk across the room? And I'm thinking, is he serious? I looked at my wife, and she could read my mind. The room is about 10 by 10. I mean, he really can't see me walk very far. Maybe one step and then another step and then turn. So I did it anyway. He said, now, when was your surgery? And so I said it was a year on January the 30th. So this past January 30th, it had been a year. He said, okay. And then he wanted me to get up on the table. So I got up on the table. He said, now when was your surgery? I kind of looked at my wife, and I looked at him again. I said, it was a year. Just 3 days ago, it was a year. He said, okay. So he had, made some moves and then told me to turn over on my side and move me around. Does that hurt? No. Does this hurt? No. He said, okay. He sat down. He said, now when was your surgery? Now, folks, at this point, I'm thinking, does this guy have dementia or something? What is going on here? This is the third time that he has asked me the same question. I mean, if I had asked a service customer, if I'm a service advisor and I ask a service customer, now which direction is it pulling? And they told me 3 times that it's pulling to the left, probably before the third time, they would have stormed out of the place. But I had been sitting in that little waiting room for an hour before he actually showed up. And I said, I told him, I answered the question the third time. And he said, well, we've got several different options. We can go in and fix it right now. Or, your hip is not totally loose. He showed us he actually had us come into this other room to look on this screen and showed us the CT scan. And, I mean, there's good bone growth when you look at it from one view. And the other view, there's a couple spaces, where it's just not grown in. And, he said, well, it depends on how much pain you're having. If you want to live with it, then you can live with it, and we can do it later, or we can do this. He said, the way I see it, there's 5 options. Well, he only mentioned 3. So since he was having a hard time remembering when, he actually, and by the way, he is the doctor that did the surgery. So, sometimes the doctors are just so overwhelmed with work. And, they rely on a lot of other people, just like I do, to try to keep them informed and to maintain records and to make sure that I have all the information at hand before I talk to a customer. So anyway, I left the place saying, honey, I'm just going to live with this. As long as I can walk, as long as that I can swing a golf club, I can sleep without pain, which is true. That, it hurts a little bit when I get up out of bed in the morning. And, if I twist it really hard, it kind of hurts. But I can work out. I can get on an elliptical or on my bicycle. I can ride. It doesn't hurt. I'm not going to fix it. So anyway, sometimes you think that customer service or good customer service, or the importance of customer service, that it only applies to retail businesses, people that are selling you stuff. and how they take care of you, maybe their product knowledge, what they make the experience like. When you go into buy clothes or something, you're not really concerned that much about the experience. But when you buy a car or you buy something, a tractor, like we sell, or a camper, you want to have a good experience. You want to feel like the people are listening to you, right? And then after the sale, you don't want them to look at you as some kind of an alien, when you show up at the business to have the oil changed or have something fixed. Too many dealerships operate that way. The service department is so disconnected from the sales department. You would think that when somebody goes into a car dealership for their first oil change, after they spent, $85,000 for an F-150, you would think that the people in the service drive would say something like, well, welcome to Gateway for your first service. We want to make this a great experience, and hopefully you won't be in our shop too long, but I want you to meet the other service advisors here that will be taking care of you in the future. And here are our business cards. If you have any issues, you give us a call. Wouldn't that be a pleasant way to welcome somebody? That was just off the top of my hat, but that just seems like a great way to welcome somebody into your place. And it lets them know that, we don't just forget you when you drive off in your new vehicle. When you come back for regular maintenance, we want you to feel special. And that's what we have to do. Otherwise, the customers defect. Will a certain number of them defect anyway? Of course they will. That's just their human nature. They're not loyal to a business because the business didn't do anything to keep them loyal. And that's something we work really hard on, and I'm going to work even harder on in the future in my dealerships. Okay, I'll be back in just 1 minute. You may have noticed that I'm still a little nasal. This is not my normal tone. Longest cold I have ever had. I think I'm at the tail end. You're hearing a totally unmedicated car guru right now. This is all the real me. Still a little nasal, though. Still can't taste much, especially in the morning. But I've got to plow through this, and I shall. I talked to my team the other day. I had so many doctor's visits, I didn't have a lot of time to spend at the dealership. Feel a little out of touch, quite frankly, but I can get back in touch real quickly. I just have to meet with 2 or 3 people to get the pulse back. One of the first things that I want to know are, how are attitudes? How are the mindsets? I want to know who's struggling. I want to know which how each of the salespeople did in the month of January, and who's at the top, who's at the bottom, and do we truly understand why the ones that are at the bottom are at the bottom? And what I've found out in this discussion is that the ones, 2 of the 3 that are at the bottom this past month were because of personal reasons. Things that are going on in their personal life is affecting their work. And the reason we're so concerned about that is because these 2 were at the top 3 months ago, where they weren't at the top, they were near the top. So it just goes to show you that the personal life, not being able to compartmentalize, is affecting the performance. And it's really not the actual performance with the customer, because they're great with customers. They're just not talking to enough people. They're kind of hiding in the shadows. I think I mentioned that a guy that I saw, I had just driven up to work, and I thought I noticed movement behind one of our dumpsters. And I just kind of looked again, and no, there was nothing there. I thought it might be one of our stray cats or something, except it was up high. And went ahead and parked and looked back towards the dumpster, and I saw a shoulder. It was definitely not a cat shoulder. It was a human shoulder. I said, well, that's weird. And then all of a sudden, his face popped out, and he had his phone up to his ear, and then he ducked behind the dumpster again. And I said, okay, I know who that is. So I came into the showroom, dropped all my stuff into my office, and went to the office, checked my mailbox, came back out, went all the way over to the Nissan showroom, to our conference room, where I could get a good view of the dumpster. And he was still there. behind the dumpster talking on the phone, doing dumpster talk when he's supposed to be working. And he was one of our salesmen. So I went and talked to my nephew Max, who's over all these people, and I said, what's going on with this person? Salesperson A. He said, a lot of family issues, a lot of stuff going on, just and struggling at work, and it's mostly because of the family issues. I said, okay, what are we doing about it? We're counseling with him. We're working with him. A lot of businesses would just fire him on the spot, and maybe we should, but we try to help our people. We try to coach them. A lot of people need a life coach. They just don't get that. They certainly don't get it from their friends or their, Facebook or TikTok or whatever they're on. Lots of times all they see are the supposed success of a lot of other people while they seem to be failing at everything they do. But that's not always true. What you see on social media and, what you hear from your friends and stuff is really not always what's going on, is it? So, what is our responsibility as a business to help our people? It's our main function, the way I see it. I mean, we are in the people development business. We want to hire the right people to begin with. That makes it a lot easier if they have the right motivation, they have the right mentality, they're intelligent, they're able to hit the ground running. But, we rarely find those people. We really don't. I mean, it's not like Greenville, Tennessee has an amazing talent pool. Most of the talented people already have good jobs. And so many others are just struggling. I mean, we put an ad on Indeed.com, and our success rate is very low. We see a lot of semi-impressive applications, and of course we'll send invitations to those semi-impressive applications, bring them in, and they're not so impressive anymore, not even semi. And because then the true story comes out, and you see with your own eyes and hear with your own ears why they are unsuccessful. And it's just that, a lot of them don't know how to interview. A lot of them don't have any kind of quality experience. And you just wonder, okay, should I give this person a chance? I mean, they have failed at multiple jobs. They don't seem extremely motivated now. Am I going to be able to turn them into something? I do have some pretty good abilities to do that and some success at it, but my failure rate is much higher than my success rate. I'll admit it. But sometimes, you really surprise yourself. It's just like this, our top guy, for example. He's consistently our top guy. And he worked at a call center in Gray, Tennessee. That was his job. And he was also a farmer. And, from an appearance standpoint, he showed up, he just looked like a kid. But there was something about my conversation with him, and especially when he talked about his farming and his level of responsibilities, what he had to do to be successful farming, and how he had to take care of the animals, and how he had to maintain equipment, and all of this stuff going on. Plus, he was working, and he was trying to make a living and trying to decide what he wanted to do. I just saw the farming thing as a very strong attribute and something that we could build upon. And so we did. We hired him. He got a haircut. He cleaned up. It's not that he was dirty. It's just that, when you go from working at a call center and farming, you got to dress a little bit different when you're selling cars and meeting the public, any type of retail business. But he did that. And he appealed also to a unique group of people, and that's country folks and farmers and people who, make a living with their hands. He was able to relate. I just saw that in him, and he's turned out to be our best salesperson and most consistent performer. You can't see discipline in a person unless they, show you some type of a track record. And discipline is a rare commodity these days. There's just people just get blown all over the place with all of the latest whims, don't they? And they're so influenced by things that shouldn't have influence on their lives. I don't care if somebody has worked at McDonald's. If they've been there a long time and they've moved up in management, and they have some good references. People are willing to say good things about them, and they've maybe been involved in other activities. They were involved in things at school other than just school. They played on a sports team. They were involved in clubs. They've done some volunteer work, after school, extracurricular stuff. It matters. You've got kids in your house, grandkids, and they're going to school, and then they're on TikTok all the time, or they're playing video games, and they're not really doing anything that's going to add value so that when they get out of school, they can get a job, or they can move on to a community college and get an associate's degree, or go to a 4-year college, or get some type of a technical job, some type of technical training where they can learn how to weld or do electronics. There's a bunch of guys right now that are wiring this dealership I'm spending $16,000 to put in special plugs in my shop so that we can work on EVs, and then I'm having to upgrade 2 of our chargers. And I was talking to the gentleman, and I asked him, where he got his training to do that. He said a lot of it was on the job, but he went to, I think, in Northeast State Tech to learn how to do wiring and electronics. Making really good money. The hourly wage is phenomenal. Believe me, I'm having to pay for it. So I know the opportunities are out there. I know the jobs are out there. I know that employers are hungry for motivated young people that really want to get out there and work. But that's the biggest challenge that I hear from other employees, from other car dealers, people in industry. We will hire 4 or 5 different people, and only one of them will actually show up, and nobody will call. I mean, what happened to the ability of the young people today to be able to communicate? Where'd the sense of responsibility go when somebody makes a commitment to actually follow through on that commitment? And I think in school, and I think also parents and other influencers that children have, our expectations are too low. And people will rise to the level of expectation, or they won't. But there has to be a level of expectation. And when people achieve it, they need to be rewarded. When they don't achieve it, they need to be reprimanded, and they need to be helped to figure out what the problem is. And, that's what I see our responsibility is. That's what I encourage my managers to do. If you have somebody that's underperforming, do they know that they're underperforming? Are they aware of the numbers? Have you reviewed with them what the expectations are, and then what happens when they don't reach them? Is it 3 strikes and you're out? What is it? Are the expectations too high for that person? Should everybody have the same standard? I've always struggled with that as far as the sales team is concerned. I mean, you're going to have the guy that sells 20 cars a month, and you're going to have the average salesperson in this country sells about 8 cars a month. And you're very fortunate if you have an 18 to 20 car a month guy or gal, sorry. But, everybody's not going to do that. So my expectation of that 18-car guy is different from my expectation of the 8-car guy. In many cases, that's all that the guy can do, sell 8 cars. If he sells 10, he's killed it. Should he be rewarded for that? I think so. But they have to know what they're expected to do. Don't you agree? Okay, I'll take my last break. I'll be back in just 1 minute. Okay, so I was really worried to see what the tariffs are going to do to the pricing. We have multiple vehicles that are built in Mexico. On the Ford side, that includes the Ford Maverick, the Bronco Sport, the Ford Escape. We also have several Nissans that are built in Mexico. A 25% tariff would make all of those vehicles pretty much sale-proof. So does Ford. Does Nissan, raise the prices on those vehicles, or do they absorb part of that, expect the dealers to absorb the difference? How much of it is passed on to consumers? I was also wondering if a lot of the components of the vehicles are made in the United States and the vehicles are just assembled in Mexico. Is it a percentage of the domestic content is not subject to the tariff? Is the final assembled product, regardless of where the components were made, is all of that subject to tariff? It's an interesting dilemma. We shall see. I was reading something else that was interesting. How about, you've heard about the 4-day work week, right? Let's see, where is this? New Car Honda and BMW of Seattle, they have switched their shop hours, and basically their technicians work 3 13-hour shifts instead of a conventional 5-day, 40-hour week. They're working 39 hours a week, 3 13-hour shifts. Would you like that? You work 3 days, get off 4 days. Well, it seems to be working good in this particular service department. They say, and I'm just quoting, better work-life balance for technicians and advisors, which helps minimize turnover, improved productivity and efficiency, which boost revenue, and more convenience for customers who enjoy a wider than normal range of hours to drop off and pick up vehicles. So the hours are now 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. at one dealership. Another dealership is 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. So part of the staff works Monday through Wednesday, and the remaining staff works Thursday through Saturday, and they also rotate schedules every 5 weeks. Now here's an interesting twist. There's one downside to the schedule. When the shifts rotate, one group of employees ends up working 6 work days in a row, while the others don't work at all for a week. So I don't know about that. 6 work days in a row at 13 hours, that would be interesting. I don't expect to be moving to this type of schedule at my dealership anytime soon, but it's one of the things that I definitely do is to stay in touch with all the trends that are going on in the industry, the auto industry that is, and how it may affect you. Well, thanks for listening, and I'll see you on the next edition of My Car Guru.